Welcome to the City Conversations. I'm opening up. I'm the Executive Director of Norwich Business Improvement District, and we're part of the partnership alongside the Norwich University of the Arts, Hethel and EIRA, who are putting on one of the City Conversations about virtual reality today. Very nicely, Stuart's already started the conversation, so thank you, Stuart. What we've got the technology. Those who have been with us before hopefully understand the excitement of the lanyards and how they work. Come back. I'm going to press the button because I'm just going to talk over a very quick video for those who are not aware. I hope we'll turn the volume off. We don't need the excitement of the talking. The interactive badges, very simple. If you put your smartphone next to someone that you're chatting to because you want to exchange information, it's QR and NFC enabled, so it will just instantly jump up on your phone. That will allow you to take the information from the person that you're chatting to. Also within the technology on your smartphone, it has all the bios, all the information and everything on for today. So hopefully it's a really useful way to interact without having to do all the good old-fashioned business cards or anything like that. You can literally pass information to information, and here's the exciting people doing the visual representation of what I'm saying, just in case some people are not voice orientated and need visual stimulus in the same way. Hopefully this will explain how it works in simple form. There we go. Well, now, let's now stop that. I think we've had enough of that excitement. There we go. I'll just do the bit while I've got a captive audience. I always like to try and explain about Norwich Business Improvement District, who we are, what we do, and why we're putting on events such as this today. The BID itself is an organisation. It's a limited company that's run by businesses for businesses. When we first started in 2012, we worked with the businesses within the very blue area of the city. And then in 2017, we went for renewal, and we've now covered the very big red area. We work with roughly 746 businesses. We develop with them a 5-year business plan, and then they get to vote on it like an election, or as we're seeing at the moment, very topically, having to justify Boris's existence and sort of go through the leadership process. But we get to be voted on, and the businesses, 50% of them need to say yes to allow us to unlock the funding, and this is set in central government legislation, and then they contribute 1% of their rateable value. When we went to ballot, it was very fortunate that we were supported by 94% of those that voted said yes. So that gives us a very good mandate. We're very happy with that. I'm sure central government likewise would be very happy with 94% support. This gives us roughly 5 million over 5 years to do all the projects, activities that we work with and do all the different bits. And I'm going to do now, instead of just talking, give you a quick visual representation of some of the activities that we do that the BID is known for. We work in 3 real areas. each one is a sort of work strand that allows us to look at different areas of the city. One is around the promoting of Norwich. So we are the organisation that runs Visit Norwich, which is the destination marketing organisation for the city. And within that is Norwich, the City of Stories, which is our external sort of visitor-facing brand, which talks to the national and international audience about what Norwich has. We obviously do some of the exciting things, so as well as pushing out the local app, which has all the information digitally, we also do the good old-fashioned map, that we do a print run of about 350,000 that you can see up to the right-hand side, and that has all the information on the city and all the different attractions and activities within it. We obviously do our social media and push out information on the city through our social media channels. We've recently gone through to try and pull together all the different brands that represent within the city. We've gone through a new branding. As you can see, with the video, it had the old brand, which now is obviously dated, and I'm off brand, which I'll be told off for, but we haven't got it reskinned yet. So, but the new branding, it works on all three of the channels: the Norwich Business Improvement District, Visit Norwich, and the others. So we recently did a brand launch. Unfortunately, time frames compressed hugely. Very annoyingly, Norwich City Football Club managed to get themselves promoted into the Premier League. I will congratulate them on that, but it meant that the day before we were due to do our brand launch, it obviously went national, and there was something of a large parade in the city, which slightly overshadowed our brand launch somewhat. But we won't be bitter about that. We'll enjoy the national profile raising that obviously being a Premier League side has for the city. But we did the brand launch. We worked with a nurse, the gentleman here, Piers Harrison Reed, who wrote a really beautiful poem on what is a Norwich. And if you haven't ever heard it, then please do go online and read it. It's a beautiful poem, very evocative. And as one of the quotes down on the bottom right-hand side, Shifty Dan wrote when he had read it, said, I think this may be the first time I've heard Norfolk and Norwich sound unapologetic about itself, which is a really positive thing. We all talk, when we're talking and promoting about the city, we're often very apologetic about ourselves. So we obviously put a lot of the work out there. We had a huge reach, lots on Facebook. The screenings of the brand launch were also very nicely at the. We had two screenings at the football club on the last day of the last home game, so that had a huge reach to make people aware that we're pushing the new brand into the out there. And so we're just quickly looking at what's the next sort of things coming up in September 2019. We're now looking at brand films for sort of Why Norwich. We're doing the new Visit Norwich website and the new BID website, rebranded, reskinned to match all the feel and the artwork within the new brand guidelines. And that will be supported by other pieces of work, podcast and campaigns within the city. We then do things such as the Norwich Experience. So we also do a lot of the events and activities that animate the city. Hopefully many of you that are locals will have seen the Tunnel of Light, and those that are national speakers. So far, I think last year it got over 12 million social media hits from those that we could track. It's an amazing visual representation of light and engagement with the city. The Run Norwich, we were one of the founding partners with it, and every year we've supported the Run Norwich. And you can see the projections that we do onto the castle for lots of the different activities and pieces that we do across the city and other people that animate the city. We also animate during the summer. We have a 10-week program of Head Out Not Home, which is about sort of musical acts that we support across the city between 3 hours, between 5 and 8, just to animate that sort of period after work but before going out. And it's Covent Garden style music, which really creates a lively atmosphere within the city. And some of the bigger citywide events, hopefully we've seen the sculptures, we've had gorillas, we've had dragons, we've had hares was the last one. And we've also worked with the Norfolk Norwich Festival. The BID is the main sponsor for each of the opening events. So if anyone was in, you would have seen someone tightrope walking across the front of the city, enormous moons and French drummers hanging from the sky. So we've done lots of different things that animate the city across each of the years. These are just some of the bigger ones, but we support and work with and add value to lots of different pieces. I won't read out the list, but these are some of the things that we've supported, delivered and worked with over the last 5 to 7 years, just showing the width and breadth of the things that the BID works on across the city. We also work with lots of different canvases and different ways to work. We started calling these murals, but apparently that's not cool anymore, and probably even using the word cool shows how outdated I already am. But apparently these are urban art now. So on the gable ends of buildings and small spaces within the city, we're already up to 7 or 8 of the murals, and the next large piece of urban art is just being drawn on the side of Frankie and Benny's on Riverside, which will be the largest one yet. It's about a 120-foot mural going up. So we're using different ways to animate and create vibrancy in the city centre and supporting beautiful pieces of art and individual works. As part of the work for business, we do a lot of the sort of less visible and the less exciting sounds wrong, but the things that are core infrastructures. We deliver the free Wi-Fi in the city centre, which is now being developed to go out further, and we're also doing the work with the City Council and the County Council, and we are funding the new wayfinding and signage test that's going out to look at how we can do that with the whole citywide scheme. We've also just opened up Pop-Up Norwich, which allows small businesses to come and test their opportunities, whether it's wine, whether it's Red Wings Horse Sanctuary, whether it's small online retailers, to have a space. So if you've not been, we'll encourage you to go there and have a look around. It's on Castle Meadow in the old Maplin store. As with everything else, data is king, so we have to justify our existence and show that what we're doing has made a difference. So we've set up within our KPIs data dashboard which monitors things like car park usage, park and ride, Wi-Fi users, city centre footfall and congestion levels within the inner ring road. We also every year do a state of the city report, which looks at lots of the different metrics across traffic, airports, retail, leisure, all the different metrics on the city. And we obviously look at our footfall levels, which over the last few years have hugely bucked the national trend, where Norwich versus the national, we are up 13.5%, which shows that where the national picture is in decline, Norwich is managing to buck that trend and trade well. I think last year, I have to hold my hands up, we were down, but I think Beast from the East had a little bit to do with that, so I haven't updated those figures yet, but I think we were down for the first time because I think for 2 weeks we literally had no footfall in the city centre. It sort of did the classic drop-off peak, so hopefully we'll see that bounce this year. We also looked and mapped some of our sphere of influence. These are organisations that we work with, obviously on national governments, local authorities, regionals. I won't bore you with all of them. The EU might slightly slide somewhat in the next coming few years, but obviously we'll intend to have that sphere of reference and work with everyone that we can. And I should also very highlight the fact that we are now the UK's first sharing city, alongside some small cities such as New York, Barcelona, Athens, Dallas, Singapore, and Norwich. Brilliant. That's the sort of things that we are doing that is shifting how we work and look at different pieces, and that beautifully segues into the things that we're doing today, as how we're pushing the boundaries, how Norwich is at the vanguard of different things at a national, international level, and virtual reality is one of those things that we see ourselves as just doing locally, but actually we are nationally pushing the boundaries on this. And so this is a great opportunity for us to be able to learn what others are doing in the field. So thank you very much, and we'll pass on.
I'm Greg Williams, I'm the editor of Wired, and I have a pretty fun job in that I get to spend my days talking to the people who are really thinking about what's coming next. So the entrepreneurs, the investors, the designers, the academics, the people who are really thinking about how the world is going to be sort of shifting in the next few years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing and how that's going to impact business, both internally and externally over the coming years. But I think that it's really important to sort of, just as a first step, to really acknowledge the fact that none of these technologies is happening in a vacuum. So we're living in this highly interdisciplinary world now where blockchain, machine learning, computational biology, robotics, additive manufacturing, and other accelerating technologies are coming together in both enterprise and industrial applications. So when we think about something like automation, there's no single technology today that's the sole driver. Each of these new technologies is having an impact, and it's actually helping to accelerate the others. No industry is immune, right? So we're seeing a massive change in every industry, from healthcare to finance to security. So whether you're in retail or shipping or transportation or tourism, really there's, new technologies offer some degree of threat to existing business models, but they also, of course, offer huge opportunities. And I think that the key point, really sort of like, I think echoing something of, that Stefan was kind of touching on, is that really how we fare in this world really isn't down to the sort of the tech itself, it's down to human beings and how we respond to the opportunities that we're being given. So the entrepreneur and investor Mark Andreessen, who some of you may have come across, has a saying that software is eating the world, and of course he's absolutely right. The world has taken on this digital layer. No industry, no business is immune. We now have internet-connected monitors for smart metering, automation in a vast array of industries, to healthcare, from healthcare to telcos, black box trading in the finance industry, robotics in manufacturing, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, a vast array of machine-to-machine systems that communicate without any mediation from human beings. And what that means is that this isn't something that's happening sort of down the line. The future isn't happening, in some kind of mythical event in the future. It's happening today. And what that means is that there is absolutely enormous opportunity for every business. But the challenge is for every organisation that many of us work with in a place where there's very much business as usual, right? People don't really want to change because change is hard. But today really we have to acknowledge that every organisation is a technology company. From Stefan's presentation, you get the feeling that technology is empowering Norwich in really interesting ways, and that's happening in other organisations that are much larger. So Ford, BMW or Toyota, what are they today in the era of Tesla or BYD, the largest manufacturer of EVs in the world based in China? What is HSBC or Lloyds or Barclays in the era of Monzo or Number 26 or any of the other challenger banks? What are Sainsbury's or Tesco in the age of Ocado or Farm Drop, those kind of challenger supermarkets? So it doesn't really matter what vertical you're in, you are a tech company today. Whether that's to optimize your performance, to automate business process, to reach new customers, deliver your products or services, we're now all of us in the technology business, and that's applied to my own industry as well, publishing. So does anyone think of themselves as a cyborg? Well, we kind of all are now, obviously, because we're living in the mobile era, and we have access to a vast repository of human knowledge, the biggest one that's ever been, and basically anything that's ever been written down, we pretty much have access to. We also have access to the most powerful computing stack ever created. Looking forward, we can see that virtually every industry now is going to be impacted by data-centric technologies. They're going to help us to understand human beings and communicate and understand the world data-driven ways in entirely new ways. And I think that to echo one of the points that was made earlier, we're sort of like seeing technology now being driven by design in interesting ways, and we're designing technology so that they adapt to how we behave as human beings. And that's a huge shift away. So if any of you are old enough to remember sort of like that first kind of like wave of computing and some of the computers that we had access to in the 80s and 90s, you had to put a command line in. You had to learn how to use the technology. Today, the technology it really comes sort of ready for us to use. Chris Anderson, former editor of Wired in the US, has a saying that if the first few years of the internet were about finding new social innovation models online, the next 10 will be about applying those to the real world, and that's the space that we're in right now. The relationship between bits and atoms is moving very quickly. It's very, very complicated, but it's only going to accelerate. The rate of change will only increase. So in the coming years, we'll see things like we're able to put sensors in pretty much anywhere in our built environments, and the data that we're going to generate and be able to process is going to enable us to understand the world in entirely new ways. We're living now, I think, and we're going to have a presentation on VR, I think after me, where the distinction between the physical and the digital world is becoming much less important. You know, technologies like virtual reality will change the way that we think, simply because when we experience virtual reality, we will create memories, and it will be as if we have actually been through those experiences. So human beings are being changed by technology, and our sense of ourselves is really going to change because of that. We're seeing impactful shifts in interesting areas: industrial digitalization, smart cities, mobility, so important, autonomous systems. And what's exciting is that this kind of coming together of these multiple disciplines means that, as I said earlier, everything will accelerate because of the progress being made elsewhere. So at a time where every industry is facing this disruption, you know, how do we kind of keep customers, right? I think as a sort of, or citizens in this instance, as our kind of central focus. So let's take a sort of high-level view, and I'd argue that pretty much from every large Silicon Valley company to any sort of like small application manufacturer in the UK, tech's sort of real advantage is that we are able to give our consumers, whoops, no, wrong one, going back here, able to give consumers an improved sort of customer experience and a much kind of remove friction from that experience. And we can see that in the way that big tech has really kept this as the sort of primary focus. So if you think of an Apple product, I remember the first time I ever bought an Apple product in the 90s, I got it home and I pulled it out and I literally turned the box upside down looking for the instruction manual. There wasn't one. I'd never bought a product quite like it where you didn't have an instruction manual. Google products, you think about search engine, you could not have a more sort of like simple UI. It's a very, very sort of simple experience. So basically, if any consumers or anyone dealing with your interface encounters something like that image at the bottom, they simply won't engage, because in a digital world, your competition is best in class. If you're a retailer, you might think that your competition is Amazon or it's Sainsbury's, but actually your competition is every single product that your consumer is engaging with, whether that's Monzo. I imagine that many people study at UEA are using those challenger banks like Monzo, number 26, Airbnb, Uber, Deliveroo, Ocado, startups that have really kind of redefined markets, products and services through tech. And products and services are really now being judged by against every brand or service in the marketplace, whether they're a direct competitor or not. Is your user experience as good as Apple? Is your user experience as good as Netflix? Today, sadly, they have to be because your customer will expect them to be. So for incumbents, the rise of technology offers great opportunity, but it does make it very, very hard to stay ahead, as this chart from the S&P 500 shows. Decline from 1960 for around 55 years. Those last three data points are actually projections, but we can see that it's much, much harder for incumbents to have a market dominance any longer. World's most valuable companies from 1998. This is just a period of 20 years. We're seeing a significant change. So Apple and Google and Microsoft and Amazon, companies of the information age. The others are companies, frankly, of like a century earlier. Companies that were enabled by technologies that were created by Victorians. So we're seeing this very, very quick transformation during our lifetimes. I think that people think about big tech companies in sort of like very similar ways. Actually, they're very different. Two of them obviously have advertising models. Let's not forget that. Facebook is basically an advertising model based on, what the academic Shoshana Rubkov has calls the surveillance economy, and that's what your data is what they're building those on. Amazon, Microsoft, Apple have a mixture of services, of retail, of cloud offerings, hardware and entertainment. So very kind of different business models. So I think it's very easy to think of big tech in one big lump, but they are very different companies. Part of the reasons for this is that the difficulty now of large organisations remaining on top is it's so much easier now to build a startup. We see you don't need massive infrastructure. You don't need to actually release massive amounts of office space. You can get a WeWork, or you can get some kind of like office share. You can buy your cloud computing. You can buy all your back office services very, very quickly. So and easily and cheaply compared to in the past. And it's really hard to put a number on a startup today, but certainly you can kind of bootstrap a business on a lot less than it used to be. And I think it's worth thinking about here is that when we think about the progress of the 90s and early parts of this century, they were really largely driven by speeding up of computational power, driven by Moore's law and silicon chips. Today things are very different across very different domains, increasingly rapid improvements in technical capability. And these domains are being glued together really through software that enables automation. Several order of magnitude improvements in domains such as genomics and AI are happening around us, and that means that the types of companies we build and the kinds of ways that they interact with consumers and the way that they build value will therefore change. And this kind of pace of change means that the large institutions are under threat from startups that can go after very specific parts of their businesses, or as people in tech call it, unbundling. So emerging companies generally don't attack incumbents head on, right? They go for very sort of like small parts of their business. Banks lose their competitive edge. Not to large, Barclays doesn't lose market share to Lloyds necessarily with their entrenched competitors, but they lose market share to smaller smaller kind of types of business like the Monzos, the number 26s, Starlings. This is the HSBC homepage. Everything from mortgages through to foreign exchange to payments, borrowing, investing, business services. There are startups going after every single one of these. Some of them are British startups like Lending Circle that have multi-billion pound valuations now. Adyen there, a Dutch startup, really has transformed the payments market. We're seeing all kinds of interesting businesses that really are going after these incumbents, and that's where the threat lies. And remember that the challenge is that this doesn't just mean startups, of course. We're looking at, as we saw the announcement of the white paper from Facebook only a couple of days ago, the large tech companies are thinking about financial services and how they can actually sort of think about crypto and start to own some of that space as well. There's been a lot of hype about it, but let's remember it's just a white paper. It's not actually in play quite yet. So how does this play out? Well, the biggest challenge for any startup is reaching scale. Incumbents have that, but they need to add innovation. So one way to think about it is Netflix. Netflix has a business imperative of it has to get to 200 million customers in order to hit its kind of its revenue targets and to keep its investors satisfied. They're getting there. They're not quite there. I think they're up to about 150 million subscribers. We'll see how that goes. The incumbents, like the big networks and the BBC, are trying to sort of add innovation, and you see something like the iPlayer, which is an amazing product that's been created in order to sort of fight off that kind of that kind of threat from the big kind of streaming players. But the challenge with every single technology is to build the use case, right? So we've all heard a lot about the connected home, and the example that everyone always gives about the connected home is the connected refrigerator that's going to change our lives. This was a difficult presentation that happened at CES in Las Vegas, the big annual consumer electronics show, where a executive from a very large hardware manufacturing electronics company was demonstrating the wonders of their smart home product, that kind of robotic thing up there on the top left, and a fridge. They filled the fridge full of food, and the question was, hey, what should we make for dinner? And you know, despite this kind of abundance of products inside the fridge, the home computer told the executive that he should make a cheese and tomato sandwich. And clearly, I don't think any of you guys needs to be told by a bot that, you know, you can make a cheese and tomato sandwich. The lesson from this is that there is very rarely a kind of what they call a category killer product, right? So something like a smartphone that comes in and completely creates a platform that really does change the game for everyone. So I think the way, in some ways, to think about innovation is to kind of think about that Bill Gates quote that we overestimate the change that technology will bring in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And I mentioned earlier that we can't kind of pretend that the challenges we face are urgent and they're happening at this very moment, but we can see this in some of the most kind of technological, the advances that are currently near term, which I'll kind of like run through now from the rest of the presentation. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen these kind of Boston Dynamics videos. There is a kind of a bit of a joke in my office that Boston Dynamics is actually a video company, not a robotics company, because they create so many of these things. Obviously, the only thing that trouble we'll see in the future with AI is that these things are going to go on YouTube and see how we treated their ancestors. But we're seeing from industrial uses to the service industry to healthcare, we'll see machines taking on new roles in our world, whether that's in the home or in the workplace. There's a hotel in Japan, it's a bit of a gimmick, but it's entirely staffed by robots. But I think that largely the robots we're going to see in our world are not going to be these anthropomorphic versions. We're going to experience these incremental changes in our lives around machines that are more reliable, faster, and more precise than human beings. We see them working, obviously, in areas like warehouses today. So this came out a couple of years ago. This is another Boston Dynamics video, and I think the thing that shocked, I was talking to someone who actually works in robotics at a university in the US, and he said that this actually was kind of quite surprising for most people who worked in the field, because they hadn't seen a robot that could actually kind of move in this way, because it feels to have developed a kind of almost like a sense of its own capabilities. And I think that what this video maybe sort of suggests is that the challenge we're going to face is actually deploying these in a factory in a way that is going to be sort of safe for human beings. So, you know, automating tasks is really only part of the equation. We've got to ensure that our desire to deploy technology doesn't have unintended consequences. If any of you have been to like an automotive manufacturing plant, or you've been to a large warehouse and you've seen these things moving around, there's a cage around them. You know, there is a kill zone. So you have to be very, very careful about the way that we deploy them. Clearly, things like pick and pack robots have a use case, but we're starting to start seeing these operating in other environments, particularly maybe in healthcare, where we're going to need sort of help with the large number of elderly people in our society. This is something from a non-profit called OpenAI in the United States, and this is, I think, it's a really great example of how we can see AI working with robotics. So all the parts you see in this video are consumer products that you could buy online. There's nothing clever here. The clever bit is the algorithm they've written, which is basically a machine learning algorithm that has been trained to turn the cube up when it's given certain challenges. And it taught itself this, right? And this is, I'll talk about AI a little bit later, but what we're seeing now is uses of AI and machine learning and robotics that are really kind of quite interesting and give us a view of what robotics might be in the future. It's obviously nowhere near as kind of agile as a human hand. It's nowhere near, you know, it's something we can't deploy at the moment, but clearly it gives us a suggestion of how the future might be. This is something that I think, we are already seeing. I've seen these things in Washington, DC. I've seen them in London. It's a startup called Starship, based in East London, one of the founders of Skype. It's a delivery robot, and you can imagine this becoming part of the customer journey here in Norwich very, very soon. And I think what's interesting about this is that this just tells us that in our cities, we're going to have to start thinking about them becoming machine readable, right? Because they're only actually going to work for people, for human beings, if they get to the right places and they interact with human beings in the right way. So that's quite a big challenge, right? How do we make our world machine readable? Walmart have been testing these robots. It's sort of very similar things in store, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is important. Technology is becoming integrated into our lives in ways that we kind of don't really notice any longer. So this is an image of a guy called Elijah Otis. He's responsible for inventing the modern elevator, and he had to go around the world. This is him at Crystal Palace at the World's Fair 1854, demonstrating that the safety system, that if the rope was cut, that the thing would stop. And he had to go around and demonstrate to everyone that this was a safe thing. People didn't want to go in elevators, but when he showed them that it would stop if the rope was cut, people began to adopt them. And what that meant was once that people were persuaded, that led to the growth of cities. So New York City, Chicago, and all our modern cities would not have been built without the elevator, and it needed someone to go around and persuade people that this thing was not dangerous. About a century later, some of you in the room might remember a guy called Reg Varney. This is him opening the world's first cash point machine in Enfield in 1967. There was a curtain around it, love it. And there was a huge crowd gathered, and everywhere in the UK they opened cash point machines or ATMs. People would gather, they would draw cash out, they were so excited by them. And the idea that, suddenly a cash point to us is would be exciting, would be a ludicrous thing, or an elevator would be a ludicrous thing, because technology has become sort of so much it's so invisible in our lives. And the parallel I'd like to draw, this is a Walmart store in the United States last year, and they've deployed, in 50 stores, they've deployed these robots. They go around, they scan shelves, they look for when goods need restocking. And when they first deployed them, people were sort of like taking selfies with them, they were filming them, they were kind of following them around. There was great excitement in these stores. Researchers from MIT went back about 18 months later to see how the human behavior had changed, and what was interesting is that the people in the stores no longer even noticed the robot. The robots were just going about their business. And I think that with elevators, with cash points, technology really becomes interesting when we don't even notice it any longer, because we are entering this age now of the autonomy economy, where machines will no longer go around about their tasks with oversight from human beings. We'll expect them to operate without our involvement. Drones are a really great example now of a technology that used to be sort of military only. Now you can buy one for £200 or £300. They have all kinds of uses, agriculture, city planning, that kind of thing. The freight industry is using them. This is actually for disaster relief. This is the earthquake in Kathmandu a couple of years ago. And I think that we need to start changing the metaphor when we think about drones. We think of them as flying objects, but actually just think of them as sort of like a service, just sucking up data that we can use in kind of interesting ways. That could be to track deforestation, the amount of trucks on a particular stretch of road, or the number of pedestrians entering or leaving a shopping mall. Other learnings could include customer behaviour. Let's try and get that going. The influence of location on sales, traffic patterns in cities and regions. We can check out supply chain disruption. You can see the number of ships coming into a port or number of trucks on a road. But I think most interestingly, though, predictive trends. And I think that's obviously where all large technology companies pretty much, I should say Facebook and Google have built their business on predictive trends. So taking your data and predicting what you're going to do next. Drones, I think, are going to be increasingly important on that because they will be able to sort of have a look at how people behave in the real world and understand how the real world will be shaped by that. So think about shopping malls. Satellite companies now offer financial companies data that enables kind of financial organisations to make bets on the quarterly performance of big box retailers like Walmart, based solely on satellite images of parking lots. So the type of car, how many passengers, their ages, what kind of day they arrive, how many people in the group. There's an Israeli startup called Windward that's able to track the movement of commodities around the world based solely on looking at shipping and the amount of water displaced by those ships. They can estimate how much wheat or oil or whatever the commodity might be. So there's a huge opportunity here for retailers, logistics companies, governments to understand and interact with our environments better. And this is a kind of part of an industry that sort of like sees the world as a geospatial kind of problem. Whether that's images from drones or whatever. This is a company called Lilium. They've built a flying taxi, go 300 kilometers an hour. They've got around $100 million funding from, I think, Horizon Ventures, one of the big VC companies anyway. And they want to sort of solve the problem of urban mobility. 80% of the world's population will live in cities by the end of this century. And we've also created a culture where everything is now on demand. So these kinds of services will be able to fulfill both mobility and also service provision in the coming years. Autonomous vehicles. This is happening. This is like a pontooning kind of bus service. You can see in Shenzhen in China. What does it mean for the world? Well, less deaths on the road for the 95% of the world. Sorry, I think 99% of the world deaths on the road are caused by human error. There is a huge battle for data going on. That's what Uber and Lyft are competing about. That's why Didi drove Uber out of China. Didi, the big ride-sharing service in China, because they want that data about how our cities are functioning and how the people are moving around, because it offers all kinds of business advantage. This is a guy who is driving a semi-autonomous car. It's a couple of years old, but I think it's fun because it's the first time he's doing it. He's not sure whether he can trust it or not. If you're a Tesla owner, you've been able to download this software for a long time, and I think it is changing the way that people interact with their vehicles. And we're seeing this shift away from car ownership towards people having access to a network. BMW is really interesting in this space. So about 2 years ago, they celebrated their centenary, and instead of looking back and saying, "Hey, we're great, we've got all this technology expertise and this engineering expertise," they looked over their shoulders and realised that their company was valued only not a huge amount more than 7-year-old startup, Uber, and they kind of thought, okay, we need to really think about our business. How are we going to survive in the next 100 years? So the executive tasked with figuring this out, a guy called Peter Schwarzenbauer, he's aligned the company around an acronym with 4 letters, ACES, ACES, autonomous, connected, emission-free and shared. And his vision is that you pay a subscription to BMW and you use its services in different ways for mobility. So maybe one day you want to drive a Mini to work, you call it up, it'll arrive, it'll be configured the way you like it, the colour, your music. The next day you have a report to read, you have a big meeting, so you will call up another kind of vehicle, an autonomous one. You'll sit in the back of the car, you'll read your report, you'll get to work. That evening it's date night, you and your partner want something special, so maybe you call up some kind of a 7 Series or even Rolls Royce, which is owned by BMW, and you have a human driver take you to the restaurant or the theatre. So I think the point being here that consumption models are changing. Customers want to interact with our brands and our services in different ways, and mobility companies are now trying to figure out how autonomous vehicles will work within mass transportation systems, which is really important. And they're also thinking about how their brands become basically platforms for service delivery. So if you're in the back of an autonomous vehicle, will you maybe have Netflix show that you've been watching? Streamed from your phone directly into your car, so you can watch that on your way to work. Maybe you could have an appointment with a doctor, a physician, while you're in your vehicle. So cars will become a place for services to be delivered, and we will not necessarily. I think young people now are just not buying vehicles. Anyone I speak to in the automotive industry, young people are not buying cars any longer. They want the service, but they don't necessarily want the product. So that's a really interesting challenge for all automotive companies. Something like supermarkets, how can they provide a service that works within this kind of large autonomous vehicle framework? For instance, someone has maybe, is heading home. Can you send the autonomous vehicle with the groceries they need for that evening's dinner in the back of it, in the boot? So there are all these ways that we can kind of connect this customer journey. I'm going to slip through the next kind of slide, actually, because I was going to talk about AR and VR, but Matthew's coming up after me, and I think he's got a lot more expertise in this area, so you're in better hands with him. I think that one area that I would want to talk about is really this shift in interfaces that we're going to see in the coming years. So, we are living in the era really of the keyboard at the moment. If you think back to when you first encountered a touch screen in 2007, 2008, it was a whole new way of interacting with technology. We're seeing a real shift going on now with voice, Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, pieces of AI that allow us to understand, interact with compute in ways that aren't text-driven. Eye tracking technologies that can feed information through visual interfaces, and our eyes can then kind of respond to information that we're given. Home market obviously dominated at the moment by the Echo. Most public kind of version of Amazon's efforts to kind of push forward AI. What's interesting about that is it shifts Amazon from being, what it used to describe itself as the everything store. You could buy everything there. And it moves them to being the everywhere store, right? So wherever you are, you can always interact with Alexa if you're driving, if you're out running errands. So there's a battle, as I said, with autonomous vehicles for data. The same is going on in your home right now, whether that's Google HomePod, the Echo, Cortana, to develop this next ubiquitous interface. In theory, this will replace not just the touch screen, but it's going to replace the search bar as well. And that's bringing a large amount of electronics companies to now start thinking about putting small cameras into pretty much every product, so that they can actually kind of think about sort of the data that they can kind of harvest from that. One study from a company called LDV Capital says that embedded cameras will grow at least 220% in the next 5 years, because the cost of them has gone through the floor. So we can attach them to pretty much every piece of hardware we want. Last year, the iPhone X put facial recognition in the hands of many consumers for the first time in the West. It's been going on in China for quite some time, as I'll talk about. And obviously that means that this all kind of like pushes in towards sort of like new business models around personalization, around real estate, and those kinds of sort of embedded systems. What could go wrong? Partially biometric. Biometrics is now part of the consumer experience in China. This is SenseTime, the world's largest AI startup. Gets data from 83 different kind of points on a human face, and it's already used with Didi, which I mentioned, the rideshare, and other Chinese sort of consumer products. Obviously, this kind of automation raises all kinds of questions about privacy. Huge security challenges around this. This is a group of researchers in Germany. We've already, of course, heard about the way that bots are able to mimic and establish personal details from people by mimicking voice. This is a bunch of researchers just using something very simple, commodity cameras, and showed us that they're able to render a map onto the faces of world leaders and then make it act like they are saying certain things in certain ways. This is automated, so we talk about the opportunity of AI in all kinds of interesting ways. What AI also allows us to do is it allows the bad guys to scale things in ways that are really quite sort of terrifying. So increasingly we're going to see security. I'm not going to actually get into Chinese retail because I'm running out of time, but I think that what we have seen definitely in China is a new vision for retail, where they're increasingly talking about like humanless stores. This is one. The investor Kai-Fu Lee has these stores where you can kind of there are no human beings working there. You go in, you can buy food, you can buy very sort of simple products. And the point I kind of wanted to touch on here was around payments. China, like 90% of transactions in China now are done through payments companies allied to large social networks. Obviously, huge data harvesting going on there. And I think that we're going to see sort of like a very similar trend going on in the UK. With, I mean, you see people now on the tube in London, and they're performing. They're not really asking for change any longer. They want you to tap your phone onto their device for payment. So I think that we are heading towards, in the West, the end of cash. China's already there. I think the next big continent to really go through that will be Africa. When you see some of the products that are being built there. In China, contactless is such a big thing that even people who are begging on the streets are now using QR codes. So this is the world that they are living in, and we are heading there fairly soon. As I said, the world is taking on this digital layer. IoT really is going to be such a kind of a growth area in the coming years. That kind of that's great for a city like Norwich. You can collect so much more data. You can understand consumers better. Obviously, there are challenges around that. One way, though, is I think of looking at the Internet of Things is through the world's largest VC fund, SoftBank Vision Fund. It's founder Maya Soshi Son. He equates the arrival of the Internet of Things to the Cambrian era's explosion of life, and he's comparing the kind of the evolutionary advantage conferred to the first species with eyes to the combinations of sensors and AI enabled by the Internet of Things. So most of the Vision Fund's investments, and they have invested in pretty much every large technology company that you can name, are around artificial intelligence and its kind of accessory components, so ubiquitous data, high-speed connections, autonomous robots, those kinds of things. I'm going to skip over the next bit because I'm nearly out of time. That was all about 3D printing and additive manufacturing. And really just sort of think about how material science is going to change over the next years. We're already sort of seeing a sort of like a decentralization of manufacturing. That trend, I think, is going to continue pretty sort of powerfully. So instead of going out to centralized manufacturing plants that then go to retailers, you'll be able to sort of just go to download a file, which then will be 3D printed either in your home or somewhere nearby, and you will be able to have a kind of a decentralized experience without kind of the environmental costs of transportation. This is something that's going on in the MIT Media Lab, and this is 4D printing. And what that means is that there's another dimension, which is time. So material science will mean that objects will alter. So we'll be able to print maybe pipes that can expand and contract according to use. So no kind of tech presentation is complete without mention of AI. There is an idea that AI is going to solve all our problems, that we're going to just deploy it in all kinds of interesting ways, and that suddenly everything becomes more efficient. It's not going to be quite like that because AI is really, really hard, and we're really at the beginning of this journey, although there is incredible research going on here in the UK with companies like DeepMind. 4 key areas at the moment that really we can apply AI to. Pattern recognition in data, I won't read it out. And I think that the way to think about it is really as an accelerant of other technologies. So everything's going to become faster, and we'll solve problems more quickly. We're seeing it now being applied to in areas like healthcare, which is really important. There was a piece of work done at Moorfields Eye Hospital because of a piece that we'd actually published in Wired. The researchers from the AI company met up, and they were able to apply AI to scans of eyes and detect problems like macular degeneration at a much higher kind of level that human beings are able to. And that frees up doctors to actually do the important stuff and spend time with patients. The 2 kind of real key areas where we see it really actually being applied at the moment is pattern recognition at scale, so identifying images. That's where autonomous cars come into it. We can identify user behavior, recommendation engines, various kind of personalization applications. We see it in commerce, identifying products for almost like products for an upsell. But really, it's being able to identify patterns at scale, and that's where it's really being applied. Process automation, of course, whether that's filing paperwork. We see the Department of Justice now using it in complex fraud cases, buying advertising, customer support. So the simplification and streamlining of business process is where it's going to start being deployed. I'm going to skip to the next slide because I am officially out of time now. So just as a kind of like to sum up, I'd like to take an inspiration from this guy. He's called Massimo Banzi. He's one of the principals behind the Arduino that some of you might have played with. It's a small microprocessor, a bit like the Raspberry Pi. And instead of, when he invented it, instead of kind of putting the IP behind some kind of, legal framework, he published the files online. Why did he do that? He wanted other people to take his invention, and he wanted them to build really cool things on top of it. So because it's small, it's open, it's easy to use, it's open source. People from all around the world have used it for really cool things, whether that's kind of building toys, or whether we did a story on a guy called Asim Hosner, who's a Syrian refugee, ambulance driver who had his leg, lost a leg during the conflict. He now lives in Berlin, and he's using the Arduino to print artificial limbs for people who've lost, been affected by the conflict. One of my favourites was a guy in the United States who he connected the Arduino to the closed captioning on his TV so it could see what words are coming up. and then the volume would be lowered so we didn't have to hear that particular news item. And the two of the words that he chose were Trump and Kardashian. And I think I have to say that we can all kind of get behind that kind of innovation. And I love this quote from Massimo: "You really don't need anyone's permission to build something great." And Ben Horowitz, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur and VC, he likens where we are with the internet to the very, very early days of the internal combustion engine. And I think that's kind of where we are at the moment, which is the idea that, you know, the internal combustion engine didn't just lead to the rise of the train and then the automobile. It led to these huge global sort of shifts. So the growth of cities, the move from agricultural economy to industrial economy. And that's what we're experiencing right now. We kind of maybe don't think that, but actually the next sort of 10, 20 years, we are going to see this massive shift. We have to prepare, we have to educate people, we have to think about the impact of automation on people's lives. So yeah, just a final word really, it's not really about the technology, it's about us as human beings and how we respond to it and the challenges that we're able to offer others and the problems that we can solve. So thanks for having me here today, and have a great day. Cheers. Thanks.
So we're going to be going through a case study specific to virtual reality with you today, something that we worked on around about a year and a half ago. It's evolved since then. The tech's obviously come a long way since a year and a half ago as well, and we're discussing kind of the evolution of this product with IKEA at the moment, so hoping to evolve it a little bit further and roll it out a little bit wider. So to give you a quick bit of background on, we set up Immersive VR Limited as a company back in May 2015. We rebranded last year as Immersive Studios for the reason that we do more than just VR, and having VR in the name was sort of pigeonholing us a little bit. So the studio is based down on Rose Lane. We've moved to, I think, 5 different studios since we started as the team's grown organically. Started with 3 of us, literally in a cupboard. We're in a cupboard in Osborne Nash. They were kind enough to give us a little space there to start with. We've grown into a decent size, pretty cool studio that we're in at the moment. Grown from a team of 3 up to a team of 20 people now, all specialising in immersive tech. So we cover 360-degree video, and that could be passive viewing video, could be interactive technology, fully interactive virtual reality, and augmented reality as our 3 core services. Alongside that, we work across a whole array of immersive technologies, interactive touchscreens, gamification, that kind of thing as well. Just jump back on there, so wonder what that Exist is up there. So Exist is a free roam VR solution that we've developed. Free roam VR is different to your traditional VR. So traditionally VR would be seen as you put a headset on, it's tethered to a computer, you can't really move around very much, you may have some kind of hand controllers that you use to interact with your environment. Free roam VR allows you to move freely around a space that can be literally as big as you want. You can interact with the objects that were within it, you can see the other participants that are in the space as well. We've developed our own solution for that, which we'll be putting onto the market next month, so it's quite exciting, and we'll be opening an entertainment space here in Norwich, above the Norwich pop-up space down on Castle Meadow, hopefully opening that next month if things go to plan as well. It's a list of the kind of clients that we've worked with, and as I mentioned, this is across many different products and services for marketing purposes, for educational training purposes, through to customer engagement, through to internal marketing and communications, through to bringing experiences back to life. Things like the National Football Museum project, which I was very proud of. We recreated the 1966 World Cup final as a full VR experience. Prince William had a look at it. That's a highlight for me. I could have retired at that point. He quite liked it. And of course we can relive that glory every day if we want to, now that it's there forever. So virtual reality is what we're talking about today. Virtual reality traditionally is computer-generated environments. You put on some kind of headset display or an HMD, which allows you to see that environment, and then you use some kind of interaction tool, which could be hand tracking, which allows you to see your hands so you can touch and interact with objects in the space, or with paddles or hand controllers, which allow you to pull triggers, push buttons, pick things up. So it's trying to add that extra layer of interactivity into a virtual space. Technology itself has come a long way. Some of these images here date back to the early 60s. There's a university in Utah with the product there on the top left. I like the device on the top right. I think that's kind of quite cool, having to put your whole head inside a machine to see something. Down to the devices of the 90s here, early 90s. There was one in Great Yarmouth, I think, in one of the arcades there. Huge problems with what we call latency with those experiences, which basically meant that you move your head around and then the environment follows you a couple of seconds later, which makes you feel extremely ill. And I'm pleased to say that the technology has come a long way since then. That's not the case anymore. So today I'm going to be talking about our virtual IKEA project, the benefits of this project to IKEA and also its customers. So although it's focused around a retail environment and it's focused around interior design and shopping for furniture, I think you'll see that the benefits of this virtual technology can be passed across many different industries and sectors and used in lots and lots of ways. We'll pick up on some of those as we go through. So we started working with IKEA. It was around about 2 years ago when we first started conversations. We put together a prototype product which was using a Samsung Gear VR headset. So that's what we call a mobile-driven virtual reality headset. Simply put a mobile phone that clicks into the front of it. That's used as the screen. You place it on your head, and you have 360 degrees of viewing space basically around you, and you can use a little touchpad on the side of the headset to interact with things, or a technology that we call gaze control, which basically has a very small crosshair in the middle of your view. It's not invasive when you're looking around at the environment, and then you can select that onto an object, leave it for a few seconds, and that acts as an interaction point which can then make the environment change or allow you to select things within that space. They liked that product a lot. We said to them at the time, we don't feel this is ready for rollout just yet, and we'd like to develop what you call a room scale VR experience. So that's using something like the HTC Vive technology. There's a couple of them out actually in the space with some of the demonstrations. Put a couple of infrared beacons into the room. There's infrared LEDs on the headset itself, so it can see where your head is. You can then move around in a predefined area to interact with the environment. So again, IKEA liked that idea and said, here's some budget to play with to see what we could come up with. Needed to kind of cover these bases in the brief though, because you'll find there's a lot of companies out there that will do innovation or use innovative products for the sake of using innovative products to have a case study or to say, yeah, we've tried that technology, and often budgets aren't good enough to create a really great product, so they park that technology and don't come back to it. So we really needed to make sure with a brand like IKEA that what we put together for them would really create value for them as a business to streamline their process and their services, but also to enhance the customer experience. Because IKEA is all about experience. When you go into one of their big stores, you walk around, you spend all day laying in beds and jumping in and out of cupboards or standing in a shower or sitting on the toilets or whatever you want to do in these room sets. And they didn't want to take away from that. So we specifically focused on their collection point stores. There's one in Norwich. I think they have 5 or 6 now throughout the UK. Much smaller footprint stores. They can't have as many room sets within those spaces. You don't buy anything or any big items while you're there to take away the same day. So they wanted to try and make something that was fun, interactive, would engage with customers, but also streamline that process and integrate into the sales process that they have already, rather than seeing it as a bolt-on. So here's a little video clip which will explain a bit more about our product.
Welcome to Virtual IKEA. This is your controller. Think of it as your computer mouse. Once you're inside a room set, you can click on any item that glows blue. Here, you can like the item and save it for later.
Simple. Right. So, benefits of this approach. So, by creating something virtually and not having to have the cost of storing lots and lots and lots of items that may not sell, we can produce unlimited product ranges virtually. Don't take up much space on a computer or a server, and they can be pulled in dynamically into these spaces. we added in what we call our wish list function. So when you're in the experience itself and you're within the room set, one of the things with VR is that you might have a great time while you're in there. If you can flick through, say, 100 or even 500 different SKUs while you're in there, or product ranges, by the time you've finished, you might think, oh, yeah, I really like that sofa that I saw 30 seconds into the experience that had the floral pattern, but I can't remember what it was called. So we added this wish list function so that you can be tracking. It's a bit like adding to your basket, really, when you're shopping online. It creates a list of your favourite options in the background. And what it also does is it starts to create a user profile. So if you're liking certain items, the next room set that you go into, it will pre-populate that room set with items of furniture or accessories that it predicts that you're going to like, and it learns and it learns and it learns as you go through. So that's very useful for the system, it's useful for the customer, but also very useful for IKEA when it comes to their geographic profiling, and they put a huge amount of investment and time and effort into learning the different markets, and even studies around what types of houses are there in a specific city, and they find that there's more 2-up, 2-down terrace house in Norwich than there are in Birmingham, for example, so they know what size rooms to be focused on with their room sets and what types of products people are likely to use. This enhances that data for them. And then also we integrated it into their EPOS system. So once you've liked something, when you finish your experience and you visit the till, they will have a list of everything that you've liked. If you want to order everything that you've liked, it's a simple click of a button, and there you go. It's trying to streamline that sales process, and as I mentioned earlier, not see it as a pointless add-on. There's actually a benefit in there. Okay, so yeah, unlimited products, as I mentioned, wishlist functionality, user profiling, the EPOS integration, and looking on to future development. So it's very much being seen as a pilot phase at the moment. If it goes well, it will be used as a national rollout. IKEA is one of those companies where it's actually run as a franchise. The UK itself is seen as a franchise of IKEA International. We've now got it in with the international team in Sweden, so we're hoping that if it works well here, it may be deployed globally, which will obviously be very, very great for us as a business. The geographic profiling, so that's looking at the wider development, taking some of that data from IKEA that they already have to make our system a lot more clever, and therefore giving customers a much, much better experience. And then global deployment, or domination we could call it, which would hopefully happen within the sort of next 12 to 24 months. And that's the project.
So yeah, we're a software company based in the heart of Norwich, like right in the centre of Norwich, and lots of the team are local. I'm a local boy, I'm from Fakenham. But yeah, we have loads of people that have gone through UEA, we have people that have gone through NUA, but we are kind of an international team as well. We've got people over from Portugal and France, and people in Australia, people in America. And yeah, as you said, we create software, and it's mainly for video people and photography people, so creatives. We've got over 4 million users worldwide now. And they range from fully fledged professionals, and some of those you will see in this video, which hopefully will not be really, really loud, it might be, through to just people starting out, and it's the beginning of their creative journey. So I'll show a video so you can get an idea of the kind of things we do.
It's all about the game. Boom! Four-way high five!
Get busy fragging or get busy dying. Wow, that's so real. Sorry. Sorry. Alan, what the?
Well, that's the first time I've seen that video. So yeah, I was as surprised as the rest of you. I was like, what is this? Yeah, so yeah, we do all that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about VR, which is kind of weird because none of that stuff was anything to do with VR, but it's something that's of like real interest to us. So we always find that VR is a really confusing technology. It's not really obvious like other technologies, the benefit of it, why it's good, why it's bad. And it's also really hard to market because no one can see it on a 2D screen and really get the impression of what it's like when you're in VR. In fact, it all looks like kind of a bad computer game, which is not how it feels when you're in it. So inherently it doesn't look that cool, and that's a real big hurdle from the outset, but it is cool. It's very cool. An important thing to remember in all of this is that the tech industry as a whole wants VR to happen. It's not only because it's cool and because sci-fi told us that we're going to have this and we should already have it and everyone should be walking around in VR, but it's because there's a massive amount of money to be made by finding the next technology and pushing technology forward. No one wants 8K TVs, no one really wanted 3D TVs, but they want to sell you something, and the thing they want to sell you is VR. So it's not really going to happen like at one critical moment and everyone's suddenly going to be in VR. It's going to be a slow burn, and that's mainly because the technology, sort of the actual burden of the technology is immense. It's huge. It's far worse than we ever had to overcome with smartphones and things like that. But to me, it feels like the beginning of the internet where everyone thought maybe they should have a website or they should be doing something, but they didn't really get what the internet was. And now we fast forward to where we are even now, and everyone is connected and streaming huge amounts of data and has a digital life. And this is where we are kind of with VR. To be honest, I don't think even, you know, once we've perfected it, no one right now could tell you where VR is going to take us, who's going to use it and how it will be used. We're too early in the game for all of that. But the thing is, like, at the moment, as a business, how do you utilize VR? This is something that we're very interested in. I'll talk about that in a minute. But at the moment, for most businesses, it is the idea that there's not that many people out there consuming it. So what you do with it has to have high returns. You give it a few years, there's going to be new games consoles coming out. Sony's games console is going to really focus on VR. There's going to be improvements to Wi-Fi and streaming technology that mean that we don't all have to be plugged in with a cable. And the audience will be massively more significant than it is now. But making money with it right now, well, the main people that make money with it right now are the people that develop the actual hardware and the technology. There's loads of investment going into that side. But then there is a lot of money made elsewhere. So straight away, training, health and safety, all this kind of thing, there's huge amounts of money being thrown at using the technology to enhance those experiences. I know Immersive do all sorts of stuff around that as well. There's loads of money going into that because there's an immediate benefit and a return to be able to say, like, we're training people better or people have more experience. The other part that's really big, and you see this a lot in like the car industry, is that they're using it to train people before they even get near heavy machinery or before they have to slow down the line. So I know at Volkswagen, I believe, on all their main lines, you have to do a load of experience in VR before you're even allowed on the factory floor because they need to keep the lines going. So again, it's an immediate return, and you can recreate that process quite easily in VR. But then there's also the people working like the expo space. So I know some people that create VR demonstrations kind of to give people demos on an expo that they otherwise couldn't have. It's impossible without VR. So if you're at CES, they will be demoing like a helicopter that's going to become a taxi, and you can sit in it and experience it, or you can see what it's like to be in an electric car that can accelerate to 60 miles an hour in 1.9 seconds. Because in the end, they hope that you're going to go and be influential and spend money on those things. So again, it's not that many people, but they're all going to spend a load of money. And that's something that people are doing right now. But if you're a smaller business, and we're very much a smaller business, or you're generally more niche, how can you use VR? Well, firstly, I wouldn't discount it just because you're like, oh, well, I'm not a big company, or this all looks very technical. Because if you can use VR and find a way to use it, then you're going to have an edge over a lot of people at the moment who can't actually work out how to use VR. So innovative uses of VR or 360 video could give you like a really competitive edge. And I think, again, Immersive, this is something that you do for a lot of your clients. You give them that competitive edge. But then, you know, the barrier to entry doesn't have to be huge. There will be people here, people outside that can talk to you about how actually you can get involved in this. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds to do it. And as with all new technologies, you're better off having a decent strategy at the start rather than just trying to catch up halfway through. So even if right now it's too risky, you should still be developing a strategy of what you're going to do with VR, AR, and how people interact with your businesses. Because just like, you know, I know a lot of people now that won't book a restaurant unless there's a website where they can book the restaurant. They're like, I don't want to have to call someone and talk to someone. I'm definitely not going to send a form and not know when I get something back. I want to book it now. So there are restaurants now that think, oh, I don't need to be on this booking system, whereas you actually do. The younger generation are just like, well, if you're not on it, then I'm just not going to use your service. And that will be the same for VR and different VR experiences. Like, people want to buy stuff online. People are going to want to buy stuff in VR, because once one person offers it, and Amazon will, and they can look at a trainer and move it around, if other people aren't offering that, then where are you going to shop? So for us, as a small business, we tried to look at how we could use VR. I love VR. I love all the technology stuff, but that's not a good enough reason. So we looked at our product offerings. So we make a photo product and a video product. And we said, oh, do we make a VR version? And very quickly we realized that that was just daft and that wasn't going to work. Firstly, doing anything in VR like video editing, you tend to be using the mouse an awful lot during video editing. So instead, you're going to be swinging your arms around, getting hot and sweaty in a room that probably isn't that nice anyway. And no one's going to want that. But also, it would take a load of resource to do it. There's not that many customers, and that just sounds like a terrible business case from the start. So instead, we started sort of considering with our users what kind of things that they face that maybe we could improve with VR. If we can make something faster, then they can save money, and those are the two key things that might make someone buy your product. So we considered a really common problem. I like to say we considered it, like we went out and did loads of research. It just so happened when we were thinking about VR, we had an artist come to us and he was saying, you know, the other day I had to animate a spaceship. And he's like, I wanted the spaceship to fly down, and then at the last minute, like, the thrusters came on, and then it landed, and it all looked very dramatic. And he said, so I knew this was going to take me hours. It's really painful doing this. It's like Excel, doing graphs and spreadsheets and stuff to work out an animation and get it how you want. And he said, I took the whole day doing it, and then we ran out of budget, basically. We ran out of time, we ran out of money, and I had to go with what I'd got, and all these little ideas I'd had for, like, oh, I want the camera to go around it, I want to do this, that, and the other. I couldn't do any of them because we didn't have any time. So from that, the thing that he could describe very clearly was that he wanted the spaceship to do this, because we can all do that, because we've all played with toys, we've all moved things around, and we thought, why don't we make a VR tool whereby you can just record what you're doing, and then you apply that to what you are trying to animate. So within like about 80 hours, we created this tool whereby he could hold something and then fly it around like a spaceship, and then what it did is recorded all of that, and then it took the hard part out, which isn't actually that hard, is changing the data from the data that it's recording into something that the other software could use. And instead of taking a whole day to do it, he could now, in literally 20 seconds, describe the animation he wanted, but he got all this additional value from being able to still spend some time on it and say, well, to the director, do you want the spaceship to do this? Do you want the spaceship to do that? Should the camera do this? Should the camera do that? And that's the kind of value you add to a process where people suddenly go, well, yeah, I have to buy a £600 VR system, and then I have to buy your software, but in one job, I have made this money back, and I can use this in lots of jobs. So yeah, that was our sort of point of actually we can do something with VR that will make us money and that will actually have a benefit to people. And I think there must be loads and loads of cases in all sorts of other businesses where there are processes that are hard to describe. I mean, data, analyzing data for people that aren't really into spreadsheets is one of them. You know, there's loads of tools whereby if you can say to your boss, you know, this year we made this much money, but next year we're going to make this much money, it's more appealing than like this cell on the graph says 100,000 and this says 200,000. People like to see things physically, and VR is the greatest way of doing that and bringing both technical or financial and all different people together to see something, because, you know, you can literally make it a pile of money, and everyone gets a pile of money. So yeah, I think the thing for you guys is in your businesses or in your lines of work is actually not to just think of like, we need to make a VR version of something we've already got, but to look at what VR can enable you to do and how it can enable you to better communicate with people. Because the great thing about VR is once you're in it, it's not like trying to ask someone to be in a video game and understand a control mechanism. You're just doing what you do every day. So yeah, that's our story of VR, and yeah, I hope you all go and find something cool to do with it, because it is the future.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Now to something completely different, I guess. We're going to talk about, you think, dementia? Well, why you were talking about VR. So hopefully, after we're finding the right slides for me, it would be very exciting. So we've been using actually technology a lot in our research for many, many years, and started really pathetically and got better and better. But really, I give you a whistle-stop tour. First of all, I need to explain to you quite a bit about how we use it for, and how can this be used, for example, for diagnostics, treatments, and a way forward in terms of healthcare. Lots of people are, of course, interested at the moment in technology and healthcare. It's a kind of a very interesting space to be in, very tricky as well in terms of data governance and ethics. So I really start very simply. Dementia is a huge, huge problem, becoming bigger and bigger every year. These are the WHO, so World Health Organization's projections for worldwide cases of dementia until 2050, and you can see we're only starting at the trajectory, so there will be a much bigger proportion of patients out there in the future, and really one dementia diagnosis every 3 seconds at the moment worldwide. So it will overtake actually stroke and heart disease, which are the leading causes of older age diseases in a few years' time. Really big disease which is about to come. Now the next question I usually get at any lay talk I'm giving, well, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? So I always throw the next slide in as well. And you have to think of dementia as a kind of an umbrella term like cancer for many different diseases, of which I've ranked which are the most common types of dementia. And what you can see is Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. And hence when people think of dementia, they think of Alzheimer's disease. But there are all these different kinds of diseases under that. And today I will be really talking only about Alzheimer's disease, even though we're doing all these different dementias research in. Now the classic thing for Alzheimer's disease, of course, people think, well, there's a memory problem. You have a memory problem, you have dementia. And so many people, of course, I see every week as hell who say to me, oh, my memory is terrible. And I say, don't worry, mine as well. You know? It's really this kind of very tricky, what is bad memory, what is good memory? But what we found out over several years, that memory might be actually not the first symptom of dementia. Instead, what we found out that the brain systems, and apologies for this very complex slide, but this is the brain basically, and one part, the kind of the spatial navigation or spatial orientation parts of the brain, how we navigate through space, are actually affected up to 10 to 15 years before memory symptoms occur. So much, much earlier, but it's very difficult to detect. And you can see here in yellow, these are the kind of regions which are really, I can't explain to you how the spatial navigation system in the brain works. It's fascinating itself as a talk. But all you need to remember is that these affected much, much earlier. And based on this, we've developed and we've developed tests for this over many years, which we use in diagnostics these days. And you can see they're really crude. So they were started in 2013. It looks, you know, like we did these very simple tests in VR, which just a PhD student of mine hacked into this. We used very basic Unity. We were very proud, even though it looks like a Soviet-style supermarket with half-empty shelves. But for us, of course, we had no clue about this at that time when we started this in 2013. And these are tests where patients just have to have an iPad, for example, and these days we have a version where you can actually, it's a kind of an AR-type version where you can look around in the supermarket and you move around and we ask, where are you? Can you point back to where you came from? And you can detect people very early, can relate this to certain brain systems and brain actually deficits, and this test is now quite widely used worldwide. So sorry for all the science bits in there, but there you go. I want to challenge you a little bit. But then we came up to a problem. We were very smug with our new test, which is now used in lots of international studies and really worldwide in many clinical centers. But very often when we do these tests with the patient, then the family turns around and tells us basically this. And, you know, Dad was terrible. He got lost driving me to my own wedding. This test doesn't tell you anything, basically, whether he has dementia or not. And this led us to a completely different journey, actually, that we realized we didn't know how normal people navigate. There are lots of urban myths out there, men and women navigate differently and so on, but if you dig into it, there's very, very little out there. And what we realized at the same time is that, of course, navigation is full in gaming. So games are full of navigation. People use it all kinds of levels, these first-person shooter games, car racing games. You have the Mario Kart, you have your Temple Run, which my kids are still obsessed with that. And you have, of course, more the real world, the Pokemon Go kind of games. And we really got together and thought, well, can we actually develop something which is much more gaming-based and collect huge data in terms of spatial navigation to test how people navigate in real life? And that's what we did. And we launched this game called Sea Hero Quest, which we developed together with, bizarrely, Deutsche Telekom, who did this as a CSR kind of project for them. And it got us in contact with loads of amazing people in the VR and gaming world. And it was an eye-opener for us researchers sitting in our labs, usually very, very limited. And Sea Hero Quest was really developed with colleagues, where we developed this kind of cute, kind of casual game, which people can play. And but the key thing behind this, all the science underneath it, is completely solid. That means we designed all the levels with the knowledge we have of how the navigation system in the brain works, what people actually look at, and what we think are the first signs of dementia. Which was, but people can play it, they need to consent it, of course, to this, and they have different levels, and it's just looking very, you have very different aspects of it. They can also customize their boats, which we learned from the gamers, that's what people want, even though it had no absolute impact on our research. But there you go, people want to customize their boat, please be my guest. But what you do in this kind of game is you navigate this boat through different kind of mazes, or you need to find there's a whole story behind it. And it's really just fun to play. And we really wanted to collect, we made it particular mobile-based, and we wanted to collect, when we had these funders, which we had involved, and of course, they said, well, how many people do you want to collect? And we said, well, let's be ambitious. Let's say we want 100,000 people in Western Europe and North America. That would be amazing, because this would give us the data. We can use them to diagnose people earlier. But basically, as always, when things take off, they really take off. Oh, I'll come back to this. So this is the science bit. I just show you this. Actually, this is me looking important with the game designers, basically, who knew much more about all this. But what you can see, all the levels, all what you can see this as a game. But underneath it, we designed how spatially intelligible this game is. We knew what all the landmarks were, how people navigate. And we measured at the same time how people move through the game every 500 milliseconds, so we can actually trace back and do trajectory data of how they navigated. As I said, it became a huge success, and 4.5 million people played in the end, played the game. 163 countries, apparently even 22 North Korea, which is definitely fake news if you ask me. The most important thing is, of course, 18 to 95-year-old players. We didn't want only to get the young white males, basically, who we were worried that only those people would be playing the game. We wanted to have a really rich kind of data for how people play this. And it's really amazing. And, I just really can dip into these kind of few things. This is just some findings where we're really finding these kind of navigation changes. You can look at different countries, how people navigate. This is just a very crude total measure of looking at this, but you can see over age that people's navigation behavior differs, and we also confirmed really the myth that men and women really navigate differently, which is pretty incredible, because I always thought it was complete rubbish. But it doesn't mean that one is better than the other, but there are two main spatial navigation systems in the brain, and apparently men and women prefer one over the other on average, which is an interesting thing. And we need to know this, of course, for diagnosis, to diagnose people better if we have a male or female patient. And you can do then all kinds of fancy analysis, because with these huge amounts of data, and that's what we spent already about this, we can also now personalize much more for how you navigate. So we can get, for all the people of the same age and same gender and same country, we can compare you to those people to make a much better diagnosis. Really, really important for personalized medicine approaches. And we started looking at this. This is really just some crude data I put together here for genetic risk people. So these are, in blue, you can see this is for game data from 27,000 people in the UK who are 50 to 70 years old. And then we have these kind of, You can see these E3, E3, E4, E4, E4. These are all genetic subgroups, basically, who had an increased risk of developing dementia. And what you can see, we can actually detect those people in just playing this kind of very silly game. We can actually detect their changes without them having any memory complaints or memory problems at that time. And we can even individualize that, which I'm not going to show. At the same time, with the trajectory data, you can use these machine learning, artificial intelligence approaches, which we're using at the moment. Now let's finally arrived at VR, a very long intro to my talk, but we also have a VR version for this game, which we took again the mobile approach. So we used the Samsung Gear VR because it's the most distributed headset worldwide, even though you have to say the resolution, and we talked about latency already, is not as great as if you use, an HTC Vive. But of course, we knew that if people use it out there, they can just plug themselves in and play again the game. We developed other levels for this for people to play. And now you can even go inside of your boat, which people again love, and they can do all kinds of personalization within the boat, again, completely irrelevant to science. But we can look actually at other scientific aspects, how people use information to navigate in the real world. And so we're still collecting data, so you can download for free from the Oculus store and play this game. And with that, what we call is a citizen science approach. You contribute your data if you consent to this to science for us to use, which is, I think, a really great approach. Now, just to tie off this, so now we're really going from this kind of information of which we have from this kind of gamified approach, just a case study of one of the projects we're doing with this, is that you can use this data, of course, as I told you already, potentially to diagnose people in a clinic when they come. But the other thing is, how does this really impact on real world? And that's where very often we researchers and people at universities are always told, well, what you're doing has no impact on real life. And there is a true point in that. So we're really trying to relate this much more. And if you know a bit about dementia, then you know that getting lost in dementia is a big, big problem in real life. Many dementia patients get lost once they have the disease, after they have it. And we're doing a project which we're doing actually with the Norfolk Police Force, who approached us and say, can we predict from people how, at the clinic already, whether they are at a higher risk of getting lost in the real world, which is a really nice way of looking at this. So we're working with them very closely together and seeing actually, can we see whether patients are at a high risk to use this? And then finally, of course, we want to use then VR to potentially train or help people not getting lost in the future. And this is really the trajectory we're on. But we can use now, VR is perfect for training people for how do you navigate, how might you find your way back, or how might you still stay as independent as long as possible. And I'll leave it at that, and thank you, vielen Dank.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for listening to us too. I think that was the most fantastic case study to hear about. Every time you hear about an application of VR, it's almost so if you just think, gosh, that's so much better than ours. That's such, what a creative use of the technology. Ours is very different, as you'll hear, but what we wanted to share with you this morning was what we've done around VR, particularly around the area of training and skills, but then also relate that back to perhaps what you could take out of it for your own organisation. Hopefully everybody will leave here today with some new ideas about how they should be embracing technology, thinking about how they could do things different. So hopefully we'll be able to close that loop for you. So I suppose the first thing to us is, why did we do it? Why did we come to VR as a technology? And I suppose we as a bit of a boast here, but we could have come to it because we're the UK's #1 university for games design. We could have come to it because we're a world top 10 university for games design. That wasn't actually the reason why we did it. We did it partly because we have a completely gamified system here for employability advice and careers preparation. We know that for creative students in particular, the whole thinking about the future thing can be a bit daunting. They don't really want their period in university ever to end, so they don't want to think about the future that goes beyond it. So for some while now, we have deployed a completely different approach to careers preparation in the university, which is basically based on a pack of cards and then a number of games that we've evolved out of that. We have a board game as well. We have a number of different activities that we do with the students around it. I'm not going to talk about that in much detail this morning. I can bore you at length about that. If you ever want to ask me, or anybody wants to come into the university and hear about our card game, I'm very happy to do that. But the real reason why we did it was because of our conundrum. So we have this conundrum that anyway students reflect the national population. We go to great lengths to recruit from all social backgrounds, from different types of ethnic minorities, all are welcome at anyway, and we've done a good job with that because our demographic profile is the UK's demographic profile. But creative industry, sadly, is white, male, middle class, and in London. And the way that this evidences itself, the first thing that we notice really is when students first join us at the beginning of year one. We meet all of our students in the first week of the first year. And I always do an exercise with them where I say, right, if anybody in your family or your friends works in creative industry, or you know someone in creative industry, or you know of someone who works in creative industry, put up your hand. And last year, out of 700 new starters, we had 6. So we've got a job to do in our careers team to connect these people to the industries that they want to do. And they don't just have, a network. Not many of them have an uncle who works for Saatchi & Saatchi, although, this year we have placed a student in Saatchi & Saatchi. So it's like, how do we make that transition for them? Work experience we know is vital. It's more than just being in a place and saying that you've got it on your CV. It's workplace literacy. It's knowing what a creative studio looks like. What should you wear when you go? How should you communicate with people? How do you work out who's who within the hierarchy? But work experience is really very difficult to secure for 2,200 students in a city like Norwich. Each year we have 100 more games designers, 100 more filmmakers, 60 animators. We've got a really vibrant creative sector here in Norwich, but it's just not that big. And where we can get it, it tends to be London-based. So we looked at the data of who is managing to secure this work experience and realised that actually it's our most affluent students who are able to connect themselves to work experience. And worse than that, we were looking at the data of people from different social backgrounds and their ultimate success in securing professional roles within creative industries, and realising that they might all come in equal, but actually the social class background that they came from was having a direct bearing on whether or not they were able to work in creative industries at the end of it. And frankly, that's not acceptable to any of us, that we're doing hopefully a better job than that within the university. We also know that work experience is really useful when it's contextualised in reflective learning, a bit of educational jargon there, but what that means is, somebody saying to you before you go out into work experience, what do you think you might learn? Which skills do you think you might be able to hone through that experience? What are you hoping to get out of it? And then after you've done the work experience, to say, right, what did you find? What were your observations? Those sessions, topping and tailing, are of tremendous value because they enable the person to really realise that learning. What did I actually see and what did I learn from that experience? But when they go out into actual work experience, of course, it's very difficult. You don't always know when they've gone out. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it isn't successful. If they have a bad experience in work experience, they can't relive it and try and do it again until they got it right. So, we needed a solution to all of those things. And we know that for a lot of our students, their first experience in work can be really very daunting. Sometimes they lack confidence. And it is our most confident students who tend to be successful in going off to get the work experience in the first place. So this is our conundrum, right? We've got to connect these students to good careers, but this is a kind of key issue in the middle of it all. So if you can't get the students to that kind of crucial work experience, then the answer is that we brought it to them instead. And I think none of us are pretending that what we've created here is a substitute for going out and doing the actual work experience, but it is a really useful rehearsal tool for students as they go out and have those first experiences. We didn't dream the idea up. This is the moment at which we kind of talk about the fact that we were not the originators of this type of learning. We found the idea actually by coming across this US business called Striver. Striver started as a startup in the States that was really to do with sports science. So it was teaching people to make the perfect move in baseball or whatever. That was the origins of their business. But they very quickly realised that there were all sorts of benefits in using VR as a medium to get people to learn all sorts of things in different contexts. And by the time that we came across them, they'd become the training partner for Walmart in the States. So you can imagine that if you're planning for something like Black Friday and you've got nearly 5,000 stores that you want to get to, that training people in retail environments to deal well with Black Friday, you know, how do you deal with queues of angry customers all wanting to buy a huge television at the same time? That actually VR is a tremendously cost-effective way to get that training out to all sorts of people. And it is now the primary mode of training for Walmart in the States. So we saw this and it sparked the kind of germ of an idea for NUA. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleagues Sebastian and Alex, who take you through the actual experience.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so in this part of the presentation, we'll kind of describe the simulations that we built, some of the decisions that we made. When I say we built them with Immersive Studios. So now would probably be a really good point just to thank the guys at Immersive for everything that they did in the project, because we definitely couldn't have done it without them, so thank you guys. But when I say we built them, we worked together with Immersive to do that. So, how does it work? First of all, so this was a kind of collaborative project with Immersive. I think from Immersive we got a full production service, and from NUA we put the kind of industry experience and pedagogical background into the project, so it was a collaboration in that regard. So at the outset of the project, we worked very closely with academics at NUA who had industry experience to devise scenarios that would allow the users to experience some of the things that might happen to them during a work experience placement. Although we decided very early on that that shouldn't include things like making tea, but actually we wanted people to feel like they were participating in a real project and had a role to play in a real project. And you've got a little bit of a image there of part of the kind of scripting and user experience process that we went through with Immersive. So Sarah already mentioned Profile, but I'll just mention it again. We used the framework provided by Profile to situate scenarios in a context that's familiar to our students. One of the benefits of work experience is that it helps students develop their transferable skills. And the advantage of using VR is that it allows that learning to take place in a safe, playful environment, and students can reflect upon the experience immediately afterwards. In this sense, it was a little bit of an experiment to see if you could use something like VR to test soft skills, because of course a lot of soft skills are interpersonal skills. So we were really experimenting there to see what we could do with this. In the end, we built 2 simulations. So the first one is centered around a company who builds digital experiences, not unlike Immersive Studios. And it contains elements relevant for students in animation, games, VFX, and also a more general kind of creative agency experience, which includes elements of project management and pitching to a client. So this version takes place on a busy studio day with an unreasonable client, and also a slightly fractured team dynamic, all of which kind of ramp up the tension. The other simulation we built is based on a fashion shoot, a kind of fashion photo shoot, wherein the participant is asked to complete the kinds of tasks that might be expected of a runner or a shoot assistant. And this one is relevant for our students in fashion communication and promotion, and also film and photography. And this one creates a kind of slightly busy, chaotic, on-set feeling. So what I'll just do now is play a very short clip from the fashion scenario. This version is not interactive, but I would encourage all of you to have a look. We've got the full version set up outside, so do come and have a look at how it really works and how it really operates in the headset. Watching it on a 2D screen like this, as someone said earlier, doesn't quite do justice, but I hope what it will do is at least give you a little bit of a feeling of how the experience works.
Beautiful, Charlie. Right, okay, now can I have some straight into Kerry, please? Really strong into the camera. Lovely. Chin down slightly. Gorgeous. Okay, now can we have a bit more movement, please? We can have some swirling of the fabrics, we can see all the colours. Beautiful. That's it. Perfect. Oh, can you just sort that out, please? How are they looking, Kerry?
Yeah, they're looking great. The shadows
Fantastic.
look really good. The movement definitely works.
Lovely. Okay, a few more. We're nearly there. Fantastic. Really strong. Beautiful. Okay, that's great. I think we've got this one in the bag, don't you?
Yeah.
Let's move on to the second look. Well done, guys. Hi, Paul. Great to see you. How's it going?
Hi, thank you for clearing up. It looks really great. Just one thing, could you just get the next outfit for the model? It's just on the road there. Thank you.
Oh, you've got the next look. Cool.
There we go. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Alex to explain a little bit more about why we were working in fashion. And after that, I'll give you a bit more of a kind of step-by-step run through of how the experiences operate.
Thank you. So when we originally started talking about the project, Sarah and Sebastian spoke to me about whether the areas of fashion and communication and marketing, which is kind of what my course deals with, had any sort of parallels, things that would work. And there's kind of two key things for us. One, it is reflected in what is happening in the fashion industry. Fashion are always at the forefront and actually are using technology much quicker than some other industries and adopting it quickly. And the other was, as you could see in the scenario they've just shown, there was lots of little idiosyncrasies that can happen on what can seemingly be a very simple thing like a photo shoot that can really unnerve a student or put them in a position where they don't feel comfortable. So we thought this was a really interesting area to try. So in terms of the fashion industry, they're kind of using virtual reality currently for three main areas. The first one is really around enhancing the in-store experience. So it's really interesting to hear from Immersive and the IKEA experience, because lots of fashion retailers are doing the same thing, whether it's trying on clothing, feeling what it might be like to go to a different environment in a look. All these different things are being used. But in particular, it's also using the technology to allow consumers or the average everyday customer to experience things that they would never normally have access to. So for example, a in-store event, a private view, the walk around the designer's studio, a catwalk show, things that are often deemed as exclusive are being sort of put out, if you like, to the average Joe. And then finally, also they're using it as an insight into the actual creative journey. Lots of designers and manufacturers are using virtual reality really well to show the make process. In 2019, we're finding lots of people questioning fast fashion, quick consumption, and how we kind of actually think and feel about our clothes. Virtual reality can actually show you the craftsmanship behind some of the clothes that are maybe more expensive or higher quality, and show you just why the journey behind it is so important. In terms of some kind of leaders, both brands and retailers have been struggling, I'm sure you've noticed over recent years, to kind of adapt to a changing digital landscape. And virtual reality has been allowing some of those fashion brands to find a new way to connect with consumers of fashion. So the American fashion brand Coach put VR technology in 10 of their stores in different shopping malls across America. And it showed them the entire catwalk process, from the minute they loaded the clothes onto the van, to the minute when they were on the catwalk with the models, to them coming off stage, the reaction of the press, the crowd. And they had these in store right next to the collections, giving you this kind of full immersive experience of the much bigger picture of what you're buying into. And in terms of the sort of CEO of that company, they were saying, for us, the VR piece is extremely important, and it's content that can be consumed everywhere. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of this phrase, everywhere, has come up a few times today. It's about access and experience. And a really lovely example of how it can be used creatively to reach consumers is through Gucci, the leading fashion brand, and they used it in their in-store windows, and they used it to bring to life artistic pieces of work through virtual reality and augmented reality. So the artist Ignacy Monreal had these beautiful works in the windows, and you were able to actually step inside the paintings, step inside the inspiration behind a collection. So that kind of led on to us feeling that this was an exciting new area that would embrace virtual reality, and hence Sebastian took like the next step.
Yeah, so okay, I'll give you a little bit more of a sense of how the experiences run. So first of all, I mean, Matt mentioned earlier when he was talking about the IKEA project that it's quite a simple controller system. It's a point and click. When we made a pilot first of all, which had a much more complex controller, and we found that some of our users were able to use that complexity, mostly games students who had experience of using controllers. But actually what we wanted to do was for it not to feel like you were playing a game. We wanted it to feel as real as possible. So we didn't want people to be kind of worrying about how the controller worked. So for the final version, we reverted to a simple point and click, again, focusing on accessibility and allowing the experience to be very much centered around what we were really trying to achieve. Similarly, we wanted to keep instructions for the experience as minimal as possible. So there's instructions given at the outset here. You can see a little example. But these are really designed just to orientate the user and help them understand what's going on. As far as possible, we wanted instructions to be intradiegetic. So we wanted them to actually emerge from conversations and from the narrative. Very much as happens on a work experience placement, you're trying to figure out what's going on, you're trying to figure out what instructions are being given to you, and trying to figure out what problems and tasks are at hand. So for instance, in this clip, you'll get you'll hear about how some of those instructions, some of the atmosphere emerges through the dialogue.
It's great that you're working on the forestry app. We're really pleased to have won that one. Should be a lot of fun, although the client is a bit of a handful. Anyway, there's a meeting later. You'll be there, right?
Morning, guys. Right.
Hi.
Simon, we've got a call coming in from the client at 12. Are you going to be free for it?
I'm working on another pitch, but I should be. What's the problem?
It's all right. It's probably just meeting agenda, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't make us a coffee, could you?
Yeah.
So the idea of that is that it sort of replicates the feeling of being dropped in the deep end of a project where everybody is already working on the project, already knows what's happening on the project. You're new, you don't know, and no one's really giving you clear instructions. So one of the things that a user of this simulation would have to do is sort of figure out what's going on, figure out the atmosphere in that scenario. We also used elements like this, extra diegetic elements, interfaces to make the scenarios interactive. We call these action points, and each simulation has 5 or 6 action points, each one loosely tied to one of the profile transferable skills that provide the framework for the simulation. This is a relatively simple one, relatively simple in the sense that it's an easy choice to make, but it's simple task to complete. And this is a slightly more complicated action point where you're asked to pick the order of slides for a presentation. But the idea of all of these is that there's not a wrong answer. You can't derail the experience by getting these in the wrong order. However, there might be consequences that affect how the scenario plays out from this point or how other characters respond to you. So, for instance, in the fashion shoot scenario, this is a scene where you have inadvertently irritated the model. So she gives you a bit of a ticking off, and then the creative director comes over and gives you a bit of a ticking off. So you do see the consequences of the choices that you make. These consequences are also communicated by the feedback screens that frame the simulation at the end. So, for instance, you have access to this concept board throughout the photo shoot, but at the end of the experience, you can compare the outcome of the photo shoot with what was on the concept board. So it reflects decisions that you may have been asked to make around lighting setups or choosing dresses, that kind of thing. Another element of the feedback is to relate the decisions you've made to profile skills, allowing the user to think about how they've engaged those transferable skills, think about the points in that simulation where those skills are important. This stuff isn't spelled out in the simulation itself, just like these skills are not necessarily spelled out for you in real life, but we wanted to create a simulation that allowed reflection and allowed students to think about what they're learning and how they can use that learning in real workplace environments. And although each simulation is entirely self-contained, the intention is to use it as a classroom resource, and the real space for feedback is with tutors or peers. So VR can never really capture anything more than perhaps a snippet of the complexity and diversity of workplace environments, but we hope by using it as a classroom tool, the conversations and the reflection that take place in the classroom can help situate the simulations in a kind of larger workplace development model. So in terms of what we found out about this, so in the kind of user testing and in the use of this in the classroom, we found that people say the following things. First of all, it feels real. By using video footage, the immersive experience is really heightened. So it's amazing how quickly after putting on a headset, you sort of forget where you really are, and you get very much sucked into the environment you're in. Users also say that they feel under pressure. We hope that's a good kind of pressure, but they feel like the stuff that is unfolding in the narrative is real, and that there's a pressure on them to perform the tasks that are being given to them. And I think this is the most interesting finding we have, people feel like they don't want to let the team down. So it's a team that we've just created, you know, and they only exist for 5 minutes in this scripted scenario. But people who play the experience don't want to let those people down. Those people are relying on them. So that's, for us, a really interesting finding. And as far as this is an experiment, I think that would be something really interesting for us to further develop and further build on. And of course, teamwork is one of the key profile skills that we work with. Okay, so I'll hand back to Alex to talk a little bit more about some of the benefits for students.
I think it's really important to just kind of register that some of these experiences might feel very normal to us. We've done these things, we've maybe had a first job, but genuinely a lot of the students who I work with have never even done a day's work experience when they might have done at secondary school. A lot of these experiences aren't happening, and they're coming to us very nervous or overly confident, either way. We see it as a really great sort of segue. As Sarah said, it's not a replacement for, it's an enhancement or a way of leading into. So Sebastian and some of our staff delivered this fashion shoot experience with a group of our first year students very early on within their experience. And we kind of found there was a number of ways that it really helped them, or things they registered. And we found that it allowed them to feel like they could make decisions or take creative risks in what they deemed to be a safe environment, one where they didn't think that they were going to be told off, told they were wrong or something wasn't right. Something that is really embedded in the NUA learning structure is about taking risks and being experimental. It's one of the great parts of being a creative, and increasingly they find that very difficult. They feel nervous or unconfident, and yet this gives them a safe space to try that out without sort of any comeback. And it allowed them to see or experience an activity in places they've not had access to. Something as simple as a photo shoot might seem really, really simple, but there's a number of players involved, a photographer, a stylist, and they won't all have access to that really quickly. It's something that takes time for them to build, so this breaks down that wall. And it provides an insight into working roles and relationships, something they've not experienced before. How did the photographer talk to the stylist? How did they respect one another? Where was the hierarchy? And how should you greet someone when you arrive on your first day? All of these things with sort of gave them access, gave them an insight they couldn't otherwise have had. In terms of where we see the potential, or personally where I see the potential as my particular course, is that with greater exposure to the technology itself, there's lots of ways in which we see our students actually exploring virtual reality, and if we use it within learning experiences, it will normalise the technology itself. We did have a student last year who also worked a little bit with Sebastian around creating 360-degree experiences, and we would hope that the more they're exposed, the more we start to see this within the actual work they create themselves. And also, if we can get or work with the industry to get buy-in, we can improve on that range of exclusive learning experiences. It is very hard to get projects or experience with high-level companies, understandably, because of the time, the expense, and sometimes potentially the legal exclusivity around what they're talking about or sharing. So if we were able to get access to more brands or businesses that bought into projects like this, students would be able to get that real behind-the-door experience. So things like a content planning meeting at Vogue would be quite an easy experience for somebody to create or film, and yet the amount a student could gain or learn from that would be incredible. The same with things like in Paris, all the different design ateliers, and they have all these incredible workmanship and craftsmanship. Well, we can't really start traipsing around 50 students from Norwich every week, but we could show them that through virtual reality. So the possibilities in terms of the educational benefit, we really feel this is just the tip of the iceberg. And back to Sarah.
So it's up to me, I think, just to kind of round it off and say, you know, what about VR then as a medium? What were our key takeouts from the whole process? And I suppose the first thing is you can bring experiences to people where they can't get there, fairly obviously. That it's fun and engaging. I think engaging is really important. Everything we'd done in careers in our gamification process to this point was about making students feel safe, happy, able to have conversations with us that they might otherwise find difficult. This is the first time that we've actually we've used fear in the experience to positive effect. There's a particularly golden moment in the one where they're presenting animations to a difficult client, where the difficult client is actually played by my dear husband. He's a solicitor in Norwich, and he turns to the intern in the experience and says, "You're new, what do you think?" And every time I've seen a student do it, they visibly jump. So it's great fun afterwards to say to them, that man is at my breakfast table. But, you know, and he's real, you know, and he is that scary. But that being able to engage with people that way is obviously creating takeouts for people that are beyond watching a film or passively being part of an experience. They are completely inclusive. So we were careful to design something that could be used by a person of any different background. You know, there's no reason in our experience where if you were, for instance, a wheelchair user, it would be exactly the same to you as anyone else. But also where we've done art-based VR things in our gallery, we've found that, you know, with this lady who was sort of almost dancing to the VR thing that we had there in the background, you know, people of different ages can enjoy them. It is a very inclusive medium. That gamification in VR is very different from just passive watching. I think there's a lot of experiences out there where people just go and have a look at different environments. I think if you can add the gamification elements, then it changes it and it becomes much more potentially powerful. And I think, you know, we're learning that the way that people respond to the 360-degree filmed elements is different from how they are with the gamified elements. And that's something that we'd love to be researching further. We've also learned that VR is not a thing for our gaming course exclusively. We have, as a result of this project, realised that we actually need to innovate every single course at NUA, and that's what we're in the process of doing now. We're training all of our staff and everybody from fashion through to fine art, animation, every single course here, architecture, interior design, all of them will be doing learning through VR from September, because all of our people going out as graduates need to have those skills as they hit the marketplace. So what should you think about? Well, I think the first thing to say is, where could you take your customer or your team or yourself through VR technology? You know, what is the world that's hard to access where this technology could help you to get there? Secondarily, you know, how could you save money? You know, in the Walmart model, I mean, who knows how much money they've saved there, but I'm guessing it's a fair amount where you haven't got to get, you know, individual trainers out to 5,000 different store locations across the USA. So how could you be using this medium to save money? It's the sort of thing, it can look like it's an expensive medium to use, but actually if you work out what you're saving, you know, be that preventing a costly problem further down the line with a piece of training, or, you know, again, by getting multiple people to reuse the experience that you make many, many times, it can actually work out to be a very economical medium to use. How could you enhance your product or service? So how can you use this so that people can experience what your team does in a very vivid way and influence purchase? And as a final thought from our presentation, really, you know, if you decide not to, where are you going to be? I mean, I think everything we've heard this morning is about how we are experiencing this kind of upheaval of the way that we all experience things and the things that we do. So I would urge you to think about your own organisations and what you do need to do differently. Thank you.